People get mad when I say this online and they say, well, oh, you can't shut down self-custody. That is true, but what you can do is say, this is illegal, and if we know that you're doing it, we're going to put you in jail. That when we talk about Bitcoin as freedom money, we're really referring to Bitcoin that has not been KYC'd, that's not controlled by an institution or fully traceable by the government, so that we can use Bitcoin in the way that it was always intended to be used. If we all abandon our home countries, there will be nowhere else to go. Quite frankly, I don't really care if they buy Bitcoin or not. I think there's a significant case to be made that it's better if they don't, because Bitcoin is for us, right? We don't need to empower the governments. Let's shrink them and move on.
What has changed in the last year for Bitcoin, but also for freedom in general, and especially with the focus on America?
Yeah, that's a good question. A lot has changed. And, there's kind of two different conversations, like the straightforward conversation about what has changed immediately. And then I think there's a secondary conversation to be had about, like, are we really changing anything long term, or are we maybe secretly ushering in, some sort of like dystopian future, which a lot of people talk about. But I think for the time being, almost everything has changed in a positive way. And we've made a huge step forward to save freedom, perhaps globally. And I know it kind of sounds crazy, but it was an interesting experience for me coming out in support of Trump and encouraging people to vote. And there were definitely like ups and downs to that. And one of the most interesting things that I didn't really expect was for a lot of foreigners who I'm meeting and interacting with at events, encouraging me and saying, like, because you say, like, well, if it doesn't work out and America becomes communist, we can move to some of these other places, right? Like there's always, we met in Prague, and I think Prague is an incredible place. I'm still a fan of El Salvador. I used to live in Dubai. And so the attitude of the people full of apathy who want to tell you don't go vote, don't be involved, was always like, oh, just flee, go somewhere else. And so I'm always weighing all these factors, right? But the thing that I didn't expect was so many people who are not American citizens to be so concerned about America saving freedom. And I think this really highlights the fact that in many people's eyes, the last stronghold of freedom globally is in the United States. And if we lose it here, we sort of lose it everywhere. And so the United States serves as this model of freedom, not only free speech, but, free ideas, the very concept of debate and disagreement. We see people in the UK being like arrested for memes and other places for wrongthink. And without the United States remaining free, the Overton window sort of shifts into a place that is completely lost. And so, I never felt like Trump was going to be this magic hero, but I did think he was a profoundly better option than the alternative. And I don't know that everyone really comprehended how bad the alternative had gotten. There's like a normalcy bias. A lot of people were like, oh, you're so dramatic. Like America is not ushering in communism. But we were, and we had political prisoners, and we had very, very serious political warfare happening in all different branches of our government. The state of things, really couldn't be overstated. And so the stakes were really high. And I'm glad that we saved them. I don't know that that saves America or freedom forever. This is a battle that we have to continue to fight, both in the United States and globally. But I think we had a huge win, and I'm happy to celebrate that. And I think this gives us a few years to build new tools to empower ourselves in the future if things do slide back towards communist global tyranny.
I mean, this is like the freedom aspect. You always have to keep fighting for it. I think there's like never the period of time where I'm like, okay, now we can lay back and freedom will always prevail.
Right.
If we slip up, there will be communists coming up, there will socialists coming up, and they will take it away, and that's like the circle of life, the cycles of life basically. And it's really interesting what happens with Trump, with Doge, not the not the coin, but the
Yeah. The
Department of
department.
Government Efficiency, something like that.
Mhm.
And overall government cutting government spending is also in Europe now. Germany, new elected minister Merz is talking about that they have to cut down government spending a lot. Austria is doing it currently. They're really going by. We also in Austria have now instated first time ever a state secretary for cutting down government spending. This was
Oh,
never
really?
there in history, and we have it now in Austria. Actually, I'm not a fan of the Austrian government, but
Yeah.
there's some positive aspect that that the government spending has to be cut down. So it does feel like something global, something like actually is kind of moving. And I like what you said of like, of course we can flee, and there are a lot of Germans that move to El Salvador, Dubai, like all those places. But I kind of like Austria, and I kind of want to keep fighting for my home country as long as possible. Like I don't want to just flee because it gets a little bit difficult. Like I. I want to fight for the home country, and I do encourage like also like Americans, like if a country like if all the good people of a country leave, like then the fight is lost. But if the good people stay and like actually keep fighting for it, then maybe they have a chance. So there's like a value in that, I think.
Yeah, I agree with that. And, if we all abandon our home countries, there will be nowhere else to go. Nowhere is perfect. We see a new piece of the conversation happening in El Salvador with the IMF agreements. And, when I was in Dubai, I got there were lots of arguments about, well, Dubai is not free. Like, what kind of an idiot are you because you think it's free in Dubai? And so nowhere is perfect. Everywhere has its challenges. And I think, your conclusion is very, I agree completely with your conclusion that we need to stay and fight. And that means being involved. And this this apathy has developed where people are like, I don't want to be involved in politics. And I was very much guilty of that. But what we've seen, and I really started like leaning into this during COVID, is how much politics do matter, whether you care or not, whether you want to be involved or not. Politics is going to be involved in your life. And so there were just several things that happened to me with COVID, and then working in the Bitcoin industry and seeing how aggressive the previous administration was being in shutting down the industry. Um, and I was not gonna give up and not fight. I'm just not capable of that. So
How do you see at Trump and the Bitcoin, what he announced on Sunday, like almost a shitcoin reserve, but now Howard Lutnick seems to kind of steer the ship in a little bit of a better direction?
yeah. So my views on this are not super popular amongst like the hardcore purity Bitcoin maxis. And I consider myself a Bitcoin maxi, but also a realist. And there is a massive divide between what Bitcoiners on Bitcoin Twitter know and uh, I don't even want to say believe, but really know as fact, and like what's happening with normies, and how much of a divide there is between the understanding, the education that's needed, the regulations, the way that everything is managed. Um, and so to me, these things are not as black and white. Like, I always knew that if we were going to save everything, it was going to be with incremental improvements. There was no chance that someone was just going to come in and say, like, with decree, you're all good, you're safe, Bitcoin is amazing, There's no capital gains. Like that's a wish list that will take years to achieve. And so I have to say, like, all of the shitcoining, all of the nonsense, like all of these things are overplayed, in my opinion. They will play out. Bitcoin will win. And to me, it's a matter of like lack of understanding from normies about how bad it really was. We had FinCEN in our offices for months during the Biden administration. I'm not sure if we discussed this last time. I'm not sure if it had happened. There was a period of time where I couldn't discuss it yet. You know, I was saying a lot of stuff on Twitter, like, I think that this is what they're trying to do. And in fact, it I knew that that was what they were trying to do because they were in our offices arguing about it, right? And so they wanted to make self custody illegal. They wanted basically to regulate the shit out of this industry and kick all the Bitcoin and crypto companies out of the United States. We saw the beginning of the success of that with a lot of the wallets that left and all these companies saying if you're an American citizen, you can't be in the United States. So it's a long-winded answer to say, like, this is not only the better of two less than ideal situations. This is actually like we are in a profoundly good place compared to where we were, let alone where we were going. And I'm happy about that. Is it perfect? No. Like, am I going to be hugely disappointed if the government uses our money to buy non-sensory? Of course. And I'm still hopeful that that's not what happens. And I don't want to say categorically that I don't really care, but to some extent, I don't really care because I still have a job. I still have a team of developers that we can go back and start building new products instead of all losing our jobs. And there are no longer regulators in our offices trying to dictate how we can and cannot do that. So to me, that's such a big win. I'm going to take that for now and just hope that Trump continues his Bitcoin journey and more politicians continue their Bitcoin journeys. And maybe in 2028, we'll get a hardcore Bitcoiner who really understands things. But going from where we were to where we are now, there's nothing but celebration from me.
And it's really cool. It's also like, I mean, Bitcoiners and I think freedom maximalists in general, they want to kind of just be kept alone. And the fact that there's not someone coming in and getting into the business, that alone is a win. And if for me, America buying Bitcoin is anyways a cherry on top. Like
right.
Even if they don't do it, like I want more Bitcoin. Like,
exactly.
Who cares if America has more Bitcoin? Americans might care. Maybe the administration cares, but especially as a non-American, I'm like I want me to have more Bitcoin. My family have more Bitcoin.
Yeah, Bitcoin is for the people, not for the governments, right? And so Trump and his crypto people have stopped the assault on the industry. And so we are free to build and educate and do whatever we want, right? For now. And so that's a huge win. And yeah, quite frankly, I don't really care if they buy Bitcoin or not. I think there's a significant case to be made that it's better if they don't, because Bitcoin is for us, right? We don't need to empower the governments. Let's shrink them and move on.
Absolutely. By the way, I don't know about the administration of government and stuff like that, but who came into office? FinSec? Is this like a financial security, like a police or something?
Yeah, basically it's the financial police. So FinCEN is a department under the Department of Treasury, and this is the department. It's one of the largest chunks of the U.S. government, and they regulate. They do all of the regulation of money and regulatory, all of the regulations around money and finance and the intersection with tech. It all falls under them. And there's a post, I'll have to pull up a post that I made examining the budgets of like the IRS, FinCEN, CFTC, the Department of Treasury. The Department of Treasury is this massive piece of the federal government. And so they're the ones that are responsible for implementing the BSA, the Bank Secrecy Act, all of the AML, the global AML laws that require that we KYC. There's KYB and KYT being built into all these different systems that people don't even know about. This all comes down from the Department of Treasury, and FinCEN is their enforcement arm. So they were basically just looking for a reason to either fine us or shut us down. I mean, that's what they do.
So they wanted to shut down self-custody under the Biden administration, and that stopped with the Trump election.
That is the path that they were on. And there's a lot of supporting rules and regulation that was out there. And people get mad when I say this online, and, because they say, well, oh, you can't shut down self-custody. And that is true. But what you can do is say, this is illegal. And if we know that you're doing it, we're going to put you in jail. You can say, if you buy your Bitcoin on an exchange, you are only allowed to send it off of the exchange to a white labeled address that we know who controls it. And that was how they were going to do it, by the way. So there's these little tiny pieces that can be controlled. I mean, if your bank doesn't want you to buy pizza, sounds absurd, right? All they have to do is make a list of pizza stores and say, you're not allowed to transact with this list of vendors. And guess what? The only way to get pizza is black market pizza. But by and large, it becomes very difficult to get pizza, right? And so the government is very creative. They're not that smart, but they're very creative. And when they want to shut something down, they can. And so, of course, there is always a way. And of course, people who are highly technical and hell-bent on getting their coins into self-custody or already having them there and not complying with future regulation, of course, they were always going to be able to do that. But those were not the people that I was speaking to, right? I'm talking about everybody else. I'm talking about your parents, your family, your grandmas, your friends that work in other industries that are not that technical, who are just trying to save in money that's not inflated away into oblivion. These people are not going to, take the extremely technical steps that it would require to get around the rules that were going to be put in place.
And yeah, I mean, there's this argument of like in China, there's also still Bitcoin, but it's different. Yes, you can buy Bitcoin or some OTC desks or whatever. I never did that, but I heard it from other people that it's possible and that the volumes actually are not that bad for the regulations that are there.
Right.
But I much prefer that Bitcoin isn't illegal and that Bitcoin is actually normalized in society, and that I can actually talk about it and people don't look at me like a truck dealer. so like that we don't want a hostile environment, even though yes, Bitcoin might not care because in other countries it will be better, but you might care and your family might care, and all your people in your country might care because they actually might benefit a lot from a friendly Bitcoin regulation and not a hostile Bitcoin regulation. So I think Bitcoiners should not be afraid or should not be too arrogant to be not in politics. Maybe it was not clear, but it's like people sometimes in Bitcoin is like, I don't care about politics, someone else should do it, or politics doesn't matter. It's like that's a kind of an almost an arrogant way of saying someone else should do it, and I'm above the law, I'm above politics, I'm above that. You're not that above it. Yes, you can flee the country. Yes, Bitcoin in self-custody. If you have it in your brain, they cannot take it from you. But do you really want to live like that? Is that
Right.
really the life you want to have?
Yeah, it's fascinating. This is so fascinating to me because maybe when I was younger and more naive, like I very much fell into the trap of I don't want to be involved in politics. I've got my "Don't Tread on Me" sign here. I was involved in the Tea Party movement in DC and really wanted nothing to do with politics. My involvement with the Tea Party was like shut down the government, like leave us alone, get out of here. Um, but as I got older and had all these experiences and lived in other countries and came back and came to work in the Bitcoin industry, and of course we all went through COVID, one thing that became very, very obvious is like, if we don't participate in making the rules and regulations that govern our societies, then we're going to be governed by rules and regulations made by people who hate us. And I don't want to live in that situation. Who wants to live in that situation? And there is this fine line that you reference, like, oh, well, we don't have to follow the rules and we can just leave and whatever. But like, you leave enough places, you neglect local rules and regulations in enough places and just keep leaving, and then there's nowhere to go. Where are you going to go? And sure, you can go live off grid and in some place, and maybe we'll all do that one day. But we have friends and families and communities, and I don't want to leave them behind to be governed by communists. So I have come to think the psyop was actually convincing people that it didn't care, that it didn't matter if they cared, and that it was cool not to care. And you're stupid and lame, and ha ha, ha ha, you think voting matters, and ha ha, you want to participate in structuring the rules and regulations that we have to live under. Like, but there is no ha ha. Like, the ha ha is, oh, you want to be governed by the people making the rules that hate you. Like, it only requires a little bit of common sense to say, like, actually we should probably be involved in this.
Especially if that construct has the monopoly on violence. Like
Yes.
you want to be a loud voice in that, arguing for freedom and not for communism, because if communism takes over and they have the monopoly on violence,
Right.
they can do a lot of bad things to the freedom fighters.
Absolutely. As we have seen them done throughout history, and as they were doing quietly here in the United States. It's it's a good point, and it's extremely important. I mean, don't give up your guns and don't stop fighting.
And I want to bring one point up also that you make of Twitter being sometimes not reflecting reality. And I lived through that. I was 1 year completely in Twitter. And then I started doing podcasting, and a lot of my opinions actually changed or was kind of softened with the podcast, because all of a sudden I spoke with so many people that actually work in the industry, actually integrating with systems. And Twitter can be a very radical place, and I love it for that, because it is radical and extreme, and it kind of shows like it's really, you say small thing and they pick like the one small thing that maybe was not 100% correct. So it's a humbling place also.
Yes.
But it's not reflecting reality to the degree it should. And I think it's sometimes important also, as a Bitcoiner, step out of that and see a bigger picture of the actual world, and not like the hyper pure Bitcoin Twitter way, which is good that we have. Like it's not a bad thing, but that is not reality.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I agree with both in that I'm glad it exists. I think it helps us, again, with the Overton window. It helps us keep the Overton window like towards that crazy freedom, super purity narrative, and ultimate destination, but also go outside and touch grass, go to your local meetup. I first started getting involved after going to my first Bitcoin event. I found a local group, and we actually had three, one north of me, one south of me, and one that we started where I live, and interact with people in real life, and you will get a very serious reality check. Normies are just very far behind, and that's okay. But I think it's much more important that we interact with people in real life, versus, I spend a lot of time screaming on the internet, but I think, you know, the time that I spend in real life, whether it's at the local meetups or at work, trying to build real products, all of that time is way more valuable.
Yeah, it's a better spent time, that's for sure. It's I unfortunately did not read really into the IMF thing because you mentioned it before. What do you think about IMF in El Salvador currently? It's also like they now stop buying Bitcoin. I heard, but Nayib Bukele posts of the Bitcoin stacks. What's going on there?
So I'm not sure yet. I'm watching it, obviously. And it's a complicated situation. Like, none of us are trying to run a country, right? And so what would you do, right? I mean, if you are running a country and you have access to a massive, massive amount of money, and you're trying to take your country from this small, dangerous place in Latin America that most people have never heard of. And if they've heard of it, it's because of the level of violence. And you want to turn that country into Singapore, which is their goal. It takes a lot of capital to do that. And so when they initially announced the IMF loan, of course, I don't like the IMF. I hate the IMF. Like, I think it's a terrible, terrible, terrible thing that exists. But going back to reality, it does exist, and it may need to be leveraged. One of my TradFi friends, when El Salvador initially, uh, a few months ago, initially announced that they were going to do the loan, one of my TradFi friends was like, well, look, and he's a big Bitcoiner. He was like, look, if you have access to that much capital, you have to take it. I mean, you just, you need the money to run your country and build your country. So at the time I was like, okay, that makes sense. And I think what came out yesterday is this new document with new terms, and people found in there terms that explicitly stated that they were not allowed to continue accumulating Bitcoin. But then we saw Bukele tweet basically like, oh, ha ha, like, you think we're going to stop buying Bitcoin. And so the one thing that we know for sure is that there's a lot that we don't know, you know, and it may be that those terms are in there, and Bukele had a meeting with them and said, we're not going to abide by that, but we'll take your money, and that they gave him the money, and that he's going to keep buying Bitcoin. Like, we don't know, but we never have all the information, right? And so I think not like withholding an extreme judgment is probably the most intelligent thing to do, because we don't know exactly what's going to happen. We don't have all the pieces of information. And also, like, none of us are the president of a country. You can yell online all that you want, that you don't like this or you don't like that. I mean, I do it all the time. But when you're actually in that position, right? Like, the things that I'm screaming on the internet that I hope will happen are in massive contrast with, like, when I go into the office and we're building products, we have to comply with all of this nonsense that exists. And I like to put equal efforts into dismantling the nonsense, but so long as it exists as rules, regulations, laws, things like that, things like the rules the IMF has in place, to some extent we have to abide it. But it's certainly interesting what's happening there. Um, I I'm trying to be more white pilled and, like, have hope and give people the benefit of the doubt. And I hope he keeps buying Bitcoin, and maybe he buys enough Bitcoin that he can go back and pay off the loan and really tell them to fuck off. Um, but we won't know until we watch it play out. Um, It's interesting down there. You know, it's not, I think I tweeted yesterday, like, I believe that they will achieve their goal and that in 20 or 30 years from now, you're going to go visit El Salvador and it's going to be akin to a Singapore or a Dubai, which will have been an insanely incredible feat. But it is not, nor do I think it really ever set out to be like a utopia for anarchy and anonymity. Um, Everything there is KYC'd. Um, again, they're building KYT, KYB into a lot of the processes. And so, you know, there's pros and cons to all of these structures and all of these deals. And there's no perfection. There's just what are you willing to compromise on?
Let's take a break for a moment and appreciate the beauty that Coin Vigilante has made with the Bitcoin watches. Those watches are the most amazing, the most elegant way of showing that you are a true Bitcoiner. And Coin Vigilante just dropped a completely new and amazing Genesis edition of their watch collections. You have the date of the first ever mined Bitcoin block in there, and of course also the block height and which epoch we are currently in. I love the level of detail they put in this masterpiece. Make sure to check out those amazing Coin Vigilante timepieces down in the descriptions. I love those watches so much. And now if you have Bitcoin, I really do hope that you don't have it on exchange, but if you do have it on exchange, I have two ways for you to deal with that. The first way is you put it on a hardware wallet. That's the entry for you to get into the self-custody game. I recommend BitBox, Bitcoin only edition for that. It's a super simple and secure way. And if you check out the link in the description, you even get 5% off if you use the code Robin. And the second way is the Bitcoin Way. The Bitcoin Way is your all-in partner in terms of how to get the most out of your sovereignty. They will personalize for you a self-custody setup that is perfect for your individual situation. They will show you how you can secure your own devices. Securing your Bitcoin is not enough. You also have to keep all your devices secure. One topic that is overlooked often is the inheritance plan. What happens with your Bitcoin once you are no longer here? Do you have a plan for that in place already? And last but not least, if you're in the jurisdictions where you don't feel safe, it's better to get a plan B. For all that, head over to thebitcoinway.com/Robin to get a 30-minute free call. And just a quick side note, I will be for the first time ever speaking at the Bitcoin Prague event in June. It will be absolutely legendary and I'm really looking forward to seeing all of you there. You can get your ticket in the link down in the description of Bitcoin Prague, and very important, use code Robin to get 10% off your ticket. I'm really looking forward seeing you there.
Yeah, it's also interesting what happens if America now starts buying Bitcoin and does less and less regulations on Bitcoin, and then they don't let El Salvador do the same. The IMF, that's an interesting dynamic between America and the IMF even.
Yeah, and you know, El Salvador has front run everybody. So even if that plays out, they could still come out ahead. You know what I mean? There's so many different factors there. If the US, I mean, the US could certainly print money to buy Bitcoin, but then what happens to the dollar? And in the end, who owns the most amount of Bitcoin? It's going to be interesting to see for sure.
It's just fascinating for me that Seyr has 500,000 Bitcoin. I mean, Seyr not, but Strategy, but like that is just starting in 2020 and having so many. That's kind of amazing. It makes you wonder what if someone like Seyr would be now the president of America. What they can acquire like 4 million Bitcoin, like if they are really aggressive with it, especially with the buying power of the central bank, basically.
Right. Yeah, that would be incredible. And, you know, that kind of speaks to my point of like, let's champion incremental improvements. We have someone in the White House who is not hostile to Bitcoin And then maybe next we get someone who is pro Bitcoin. And then maybe one day we have a Seyr as president, right?
Would be fun. A lot of people also hyped the last election between Biden and or like Harris and Trump then as a fork in the road. And I think a lot of Bitcoiners also see Bitcoin almost like a fork in the road of, are we going down a sound money, non-surveillance kind of a road, or are we going down the CBDC and digital euro and that kind of a road? Are we now with America being on the right side of the history, at least as it seems right now, already on the path to the Bitcoin world, or is that fork, do you think, still in front of us?
I think there's a few things that need to play out before we finalize which direction we've gone, and one of those things involve more privacy tools built on Bitcoin. So we saw, the aggressive shutdown of mixers. Those were significant tools that Bitcoiners and people on crypto could use to remain anonymous. Or, I want to say that we have made a significant step towards hard money and Bitcoin. But the one thing that I want to make sure that doesn't get lost in the conversation is that when we talk about Bitcoin as freedom money, we're really referring to Bitcoin that has not been KYC'd, that's not controlled by an institution or fully traceable by the government, the way that the dollar is, a digital dollar. And so we need to either champion non-KYC'd Bitcoin or abolish the AML laws or build more privacy tools so that we can use Bitcoin in the way that it was always intended to be used.
How easy is it in America to get non-KYC Bitcoin? The European Union definitely wants to make it more difficult right now.
Yes, it is very difficult.
So you have to go basically to buy. Do you have some platforms, like I think in Switzerland we have Beach Bitcoin, where you can buy non-KYC Bitcoin on a platform. So is there things like that in America?
Yeah, so I think BISC is probably the most popular here. And you can still buy small amounts at a lot of the ATMs, but it is getting harder and harder. And it's going to continue to get harder.
So there's a real, is that maybe even the most important battle in Bitcoin, the privacy battle?
I think probably, because if we end up with all of our Bitcoin in the existing traditional financial structures, then it's not that different than a digital dollar. It is in the sense that you can get it out with the privacy tools and mixers and, a little bit of technical skill, of course. But what I don't want to see is just the recreation of fiat structures on a blockchain. As we're seeing with some of these other shitcoins like Ripple and Ethereum, obviously that is just nonsense. But this is still a factor in Bitcoin development. And so I think this brings us back to the importance of fighting the regulation. And, there's a lot of studies that have been done that since the AML, KYC, anti-terrorist, money laundering laws were put into place in order to surveil the shit out of everyone globally using the dollar, they're not stopping any terrorism. They're not stopping any crime, right? These things are really just tools of control and surveillance. And so to me, the best hope is in not only building privacy tools, but fighting the regulation. It's mainstream conversation now to say we might shut down the IRS. We might shut down all of these alphabet agencies. And so we need to add into the conversation, let's also shut down the Bank Secrecy Act, get rid of AML regulation, and then we've achieved real freedom.
How much has changed actually on the street sentiment around the election? I mean, from just a European standpoint, a lot has changed of like how I look at America from 2 points of like the mainstream lens. It's always funny to look into that, and just like my American friends and Twitter and how I see that, it's way more hopeful. It seems like people are like, hey, like maybe it's actually going in the right direction, even though people are sometimes disappointed with the shitcoinery and the Trump meme coin and all those things. But I think if you're focused on like the big things that are happening, like Ross is free, I
Yeah.
think not enough people talk about that. Like there was some tweet that I really loved. Some like, oh, like sometimes I just think about shitcoining and this and that, but then I remember Ross is free. How amazing is that? So what I want to get at is how is it in America, the sentiment shift in maybe also in your area, in your friend circles, your family circles, in where you live?
I am full of hope, and everybody I know is full of hope and excitement again, excitement for the future, for what we could build and what our lives might look like. I think there's still a small percentage of people, these really ingrained people on the left that are very far left and very dug into the propaganda, who are terrified. So we still see a little bit of a divide, but more and more people are waking up to the corruption that Trump and his new cabinet are fighting. I think they're uncovering all of these different things. Every day we wake up and there's some new nonsense that has been uncovered. But instead of nonsense being uncovered, like, oh, I can't believe they're doing this, what we're seeing is, look at what they were doing and we have stopped it. And so how can you not be excited about that? You know what I mean? I'm excited. I'm very hopeful. We're seeing insane budget cuts and insane amounts of corruption being shut down. Of course, there's always, the bar kind of gets moved from the purists. Um, but there's so much to be excited and hopeful about. And it's an incredible thing to be alive for and live through.
One of the highlights of the administration was actually JD Vance being in Munich and delivering an amazing speech. I first only heard about the mainstream coverage of like,
Mhm.
oh, like JD Vance is trumping on Europe, like the relationship to America is not good anymore and stuff like that. Then I was like, oh, like let's see what he actually said in the speech. And I was like listening to the speech, like he just said facts, and he just said that we have to protect freedom of speech. Basically, that was his whole speech. I was like, how can you be against that? Like, how can you say anything? He did not say anything bad about anyone. I mean, he pointed to some bad freedom of speech things that were going on in the UK, which were true, and it is something that to worry about. But it's always funny how the mainstream portrays something and how the first source, like the actual source, is saying it.
Yeah, the propaganda is still going. Every once in a while I'll catch a clip, as you mentioned, from like the legacy media, and they're always putting their spin on it. But what gives me a lot of hope is the fact that no one's really watching it, right? The numbers, the viewership numbers are just in the ocean. They're so low, right? They're not even on Earth. They're below the Earth. No one is watching this nonsense. We see shows being canceled, and the numbers are just not there. And at the same time, the people are going to independent creators and to X and different platforms where you can view the source, like the actual speech that was given. And so more and more people are understanding that the TV box on the wall is not worth anything, and we're not going to listen to the propaganda. And that gives me hope too. Like, people used to laugh at me because I said, at least in China they're honest about their propaganda, And it's true. Like in China, no one watches the news. Like, you know that it's all lies. And I think in the United States, we've gotten much, much closer to that, where the news is still full of lies, but most people have come to understand that. And so they just don't pay attention to it anymore. And that is awesome.
Yeah, and the TV box, as you mentioned it just runs now YouTube and Rumble, and no
Right.
longer the, I don't know, Fox News, or I don't know a lot of
Yeah,
American
CNN
channels.
and
Yeah,
even ABC and NBC, like that many, many years ago were seen as like maybe less biased. It's all very, very biased, and they're all working together and cooperating. And so much of that has been exposed, and there's so many people talking about it. And, you know, eh, I think most people have really waken up to that. And that gives me hope too, right? Because we are going back to a place where people are thinking for themselves. They're looking for the source of information so that they can form their own opinion. And that's amazing. And even if we disagree on things, we can have a debate about it, right? And we can go back to a place where we don't agree on everything, but we are grounded in reality, and we can discuss facts when we might have different opinions on those facts, but at least we can agree on what the facts are.
how much is the social media and the internet empowering actually the individual beyond Bitcoin? Like Bitcoin is the money part, but social media and the internet and global communication is so important also for that freedom movement.
Yeah, I think it is. The movement of information is just as important as the movement of money. And so we have to have the tools in order to do that. And again, there's a little bit of a parallel, I think, with Bitcoin, where people will say to you like, "Oh, well, screw X, it's too centralized. You can go and use, now we have Nostr, but before that there were more complicated like messaging systems and networks that you could use." And my stance on this is really the same, where I want these tools to be as accessible for as many people as possible. And Noster's getting better and better. I signed up actually with Primal a couple weeks ago and was really impressed with how far they've come in their development. And so I think these things are extremely important and play a very, very significant role in keeping our freedoms and being able to communicate about the truth about things, and then also serving as a way for people to communicate when their freedoms are being shut down. Like, if it weren't for X, would we know what was happening in the UK? Or would we have ever seen Vance's actual speech? Probably not, or less and less people would have. So it's extremely important, and it gives me a lot of hope that I know a lot of people that are getting on X who never would have before. Maybe they had a Facebook, maybe not, but now they're coming to X to look for news. And that's awesome.
And it's like it's a circle, because we have on the one side like LinkedIn and Facebook, and now they are actually getting impacted by Twitter and X, because they are seeing, especially Mark Zuckerberg saw that, and like, oh, like a lot of people leave to X. I mean, he sees the data. That's why he went on Joe Rogan, and that's why he tries to kind of steer away from that censorship thing that he and his company kind of built. Was really fun to see the Joe Rogan podcast with Mark Zuckerberg, where he's like, yeah, I basically fucked up, but I'm here now. I'm part
Right.
of this crowd now.
Right.
I want to be cool again.
Yeah, and it's funny, people were really upset, like, "Oh, screw Zuckerberg, he can't be trusted." But I think you're kind of like missing the trees through the forest or whatever it is, because we don't have to trust Zuckerberg. Like, the message there is that the popular thing to say and to pretend to be on the team of is the freedom and the non-censoring and things like that. So it's not a matter of like, do we trust him or not? It's a matter of the mainstream narrative has shifted to the extent that he feels like he has to say that. And so, is it trustworthy or not is really irrelevant. Like, it's what needed to be said, and he knew it, and that's the win.
Exactly, and like Twitter influenced that, and maybe Nostra and other social media platforms, or like Rumble even,
Yeah.
influence Nostra again to be more freedom minded, because they also see like, oh, we cancel someone, and they go to Rumble.
Right.
It's not like they stop using social media. They go somewhere else, and they take the audience and their connections and their network with them. So if you are a closed system that censors a lot, naturally at some point you will be irrelevant, because people are going to the open system where there's more information and better information, because more information can lead to better information. So it's just inevitable that we have a free open social media. So I think Nostra is extremely important to impact also the other ones to be more open and to be like, hey, like, yeah, you can maybe we all kind of agree on, or like 90% of the population agrees on that you shouldn't say that, but we also agree on that it's a good thing that you can say that and not get censored. Like, even if it's a bad idea, you should be able to articulate bad ideas. So even if it's something really bad or something critical, so you cannot censor it anyways. Like, it will land somewhere on the internet.
Right.
Why not on our platform?
Exactly. I completely agree. Censor free speech is not for people we agree with. It's for people that we disagree with. And, you know, I mean, if you go back to like pre-internet days, you could never stop anyone from saying anything. What were you going to do? Like tape their mouth shut, remove their vocal cords? These things are crazy, but you kind of play it out to this period of time we had on social media where people were getting canceled and all of that. And it's like, well, that's sort of the equivalent, but that's not what was ever done. All that was done was that people laughed at you and they didn't take you seriously, and you got sort of socially ostracized, and you got ignored. And I think that that's exactly what should happen online as well. People can say whatever they want, um, but we can laugh at them and ignore them. And in the end, um, it's the good, intelligent principles and views that win out. And I don't know why people are so scared to just merely hear or read things that they disagree with. If you disagree with it, you can just move on and ignore it, or you can form an intelligent reply and provide a response. But either way, like, we're not going to tape someone's mouth shut.
Maybe people are not ready for freedom. They want something that is like a parent above them, that kind of keeps the kids in place, which is a really weird thing. But some people don't. They prefer having some instant above them that tells them what to think and in which, where to go, even though they would never say that in that
Yeah.
words, but they kind of do.
Yeah, unfortunately, this is true. A lot of people don't necessarily want to be free. So that's a battle that we have to always fight, right? And we can't, this goes back to like, be involved, because otherwise the people that want to be governed are going to be the ones that are involved, and we don't want to live under the rules that they desire. So we have to speak up and build local communities and be involved. Otherwise, the other side that doesn't care at all about freedom, that actually wants structures in place to govern them, they're going to be the ones doing the governing, and we can't allow for that.
Absolutely, yeah, really, really cool. One last thing before we come to the end routine. How big of an impact do you think Bitcoin will have overall on the freedom movement if you zoom out like 50, 100 years, of like how will people look back at Bitcoin, of how big of a revolution it will be? Do you compare it to like the printing press and some other people do, of like that's actually evolved our civilization on such a massive way, or is it like one tool out of a toolbox kind of a thing?
No, I think it will be massive. I think it will be looked at the way that we look at the printing press and the internet. I think Bitcoin ultimately will have saved freedom. We are in the battle now. And so sometimes you're in the weeds, right? And you're like, well, we have to fight this and we need to worry about that. But over a long enough time frame, I believe that we will look back and Bitcoin will have won. And Bitcoin will have been the tool that we used to save ourselves. The internet changed every single piece of our lives, and so will Bitcoin.
I love that. Really cool. I have one. I think the question was not there before when we made the first podcast. I now ask each and every one of my guests, what can we learn from you besides Bitcoin? I think when we did it, I still didn't had it. So what can we learn from you besides Bitcoin?
Sure. So there are actually 2 threads that I have like waiting in my brain that I wanted to post so that I could reference them. One is about the Smith-Mund Act, which is it was an act put in place in 1948 that disallowed it made it illegal so that the intelligence community in the United States could not run propaganda on its own people. And in 2014, Obama repealed it. He didn't actually repeal it, he modernized it and changed the language in a way that allowed the intelligence communities to start running propaganda on its own people. And to me, this is like a linchpin for when this cascade of things changed. So I will take every opportunity that I can to speak about that. And I'm sort of reply guying on Twitter, bigger accounts, and people like Mike Benz are now talking about it. So I'm super excited about that. And if you want to go really outside, away from Bitcoin and technology and politics and all of that, I will say I am unfortunately getting more and more questions about Lyme disease. And so if you or anyone that you know has Lyme disease and is struggling, I have a couple of things that I've written online about this, and I'm going to write like a thread that combines all the information so I can just reference it for people. I haven't really discussed it at length, but when I was in my early 20s, I got very, very sick with late stage Lyme disease and was told by many doctors that I would not survive. It was in my central nervous system. And I did survive, and I healed myself entirely. And I learned a lot, unfortunately, in that process. And I am happy to serve as a source of information for anyone that needs it, because as they shut down ivermectin, and I don't know what you can and can't say these days on YouTube, but during COVID we saw the vilification of ivermectin, because it was a relatively it was a safe, easy old drug that there was no money to be made on, that served as an antiviral and could have helped a lot of people. And you were vilified and canceled and shut down for talking about it. And there is a drug that exists for Lyme disease. It's called disulfiram antabuse, and it does similar things. It has antimicrobial effects, and it saved my life. But a lot of people don't know about it. There have only been some very small trials. And so, that probably is out of left field for a lot of people, but I actually get 3 or 4 people who call me or randomly text me a month and say, I have a friend, I have a family member, can you just talk to them? And I will, because I almost died from this thing. And the mainstream medical industry is, of course, no help. But there is help, and there are ways to get healthy. And so that's my completely unrelated to anything area of expertise.
Yeah, I got yesterday the feedback of everything is connected to Bitcoin, but of course, then you cannot connect everything. But
I can connect Bitcoin. I can connect it to Bitcoin because actually Lyme disease is a man-made disease, made by the U.S. government, put into ticks in the 60s, and distributed up in Connecticut, in Georgia, and Florida. It's a bioweapon fueled by fiat corruption. So there's your Bitcoin connection.
What is it like? Does it fight the central nervous system, or like how does it work?
So it's a bacterial infection, and if you know that you got bit by a tick and you catch it right away, you can take 2 weeks of antibiotics and it sort of kills it off, and that's the end of it, which of course is the mainstream narrative that this is how you cure it and it's no big deal, because they don't want anyone paying additional attention to it and learning too much information. But if you don't know that you got bit by a tick, because they're very small, sometimes we don't see them, they can be in the hair, and it transmits the bacteria and has time to do its thing, it will break down your immune system and it will attack various systems within your body. So it can be difficult to diagnose because not everyone has the exact same symptoms, because it depends which of your body's systems that it attacks. So for example, if it attacks your skin, you might get rashes. If it attacks your joints, you're going to have joint pain. There's common things, but it never looks the same. And there's all of these co-infections, which is a whole nother, I mean, I could tell you about that for hours. But it starts to break down the immune system. And then, of course, you have this bacteria thriving in your body. And so it really, really attacks you, and it can go anywhere. Unfortunately, mine went into the central nervous system. And so it got through the blood-brain barrier. And I got to a point where I couldn't speak. I could barely function. They took away my driver's license. It was really, really bad. And you do see that, but the mainstream medical narrative on that is that you must have something else. They'll diagnose you with all sorts of autoimmune diseases and all kinds of other things, when it's really just untreated Lyme disease.
That must be horrible, like going through that. And so you were healthy before, and then you got it, and then all of a sudden they took away your travel license. That must be a hard time.
It was, and I think this is one of the things that radicalized me, is not only going through that experience and kind of having a detour from like normal life, especially being that young, but also I was lucky enough to meet a holistic doctor way back in the day before anybody knew what that meant. He treated the Amish people that lived around us, and he was from Norway, but he was living in America. And I started to learn about the pharmaceutical industry and the food industry and how they were poisoning us, and how, I mean, all of these things that are rabbit holes now that Bitcoiners are going down these rabbit holes. I learned about a lot of these things 20 years ago. And so when I came to Bitcoin and someone confronted me with the fact that everything that you know about money is a lie, I just said, of course it is, because I've learned this lesson over and over and over. Everything you think you know about food, it's a lie, right? The food pyramid that the government created, it's nonsense. Pharmaceuticals, it's all a lie. It's just for profit. They don't care about your health. Um, everything is a lie. And so I think you know, it radicalized me in a way that prepared me for Bitcoin. And so when I found Bitcoin, it was very easy to say, of course. Of course, everything I thought was true was not true. Now let's find out the truth.
It makes you like, once one of the barriers in your mind breaks, you question all the other barriers. Most Bitcoiners come with Bitcoin through that, but there's also a big amount of Bitcoiners that have broken those narrative down before Bitcoin, as you, and then Bitcoin came in like, oh yeah, central banks, yeah, look into this. Oh, actually, it's
It makes
as the other
sense.
things. It makes sense. Yeah, it's
Right.
just like one more stone in the puzzle. It makes a lot of sense. Really interesting. Of like I heard Lyme disease before, but I never had any contact with that. So it's interesting. So you completely got treated from that. Was it just that medication that you mentioned, or was it also like transforming like diet and making sports and all that? Did you also came through that out there?
Oh, everything. I have tried nearly everything. I did a lot of things before I found Well, I was actually sick before they were looking at that drug. Um, so, I stopped eating gluten for a very long time, and this was before gluten-free products existed. It wasn't a popular thing to do, right? You just didn't eat anything that had gluten in it. I changed my diet. I had always been very active. I played tennis and um but yes, I mean, there's not any part of my life that didn't get transformed. I used the infrared sauna to detox, and I did all kinds of different supplement protocols and learned about detox and making sure that you don't have mold exposure and really like optimizing your health so that your body can heal itself. Um, so yeah, it's been at this point almost a lifelong journey to understand all of that and to stay healthy and um, fight the medical industrial complex and the food industrial complex. And I'm so excited to see all of this stuff become popular because I'm used to getting like made fun of for it. In 2008, there was this documentary called Food Inc., and they talked a lot about processed foods and the industrialization of the meat industry. And I stopped eating sick chicken. My family dubbed this term sick chicken to make fun of me because I would only eat pasture raised meat. And, at the time, this was like a weird conspiracy theory niche thing that nobody cared about. But now it's very popular, and I talk to people about it all day, and I love it. It makes me so happy that so many people are informed about these things now.
Yeah, people are getting more informed. It's like you cannot trick people as easy as like imagine without the internet, you control the media centers, or maybe there's like just like free TV channels and you control all of them. Like then it's pretty easy to sell something or make something go away. But now, like everyone has their phones all the time. This if someone captured it and it will land on the internet, like and it never goes away. The more you try to hide it, the bigger the story gets.
Right. Yeah, it's great. And this goes back to, we talked about like the importance of access to information, and it's so important and it's getting easier and easier. And that gives me so much hope for the future.
Absolutely, really cool. We have an end routine in the podcast where the previous guest is actually asking a question for the next guest without knowing who the next guest actually is. And the question for you is: what is the worst thing you could do in Bitcoin?
Diversify. Right? Into all the other coins because I'm late to Bitcoin or some nonsense. Like, no. Study more. Study more. Look up pets.com, right? Like
Try to really understand Bitcoin. Do not sell. There's no second best.
Yeah. And also, like, I think the missing piece for a lot of people is the understanding of fiat. And so they're in Bitcoin to make more fiat, and they think that these other coins are going to make them more fiat. And that's kind of the goal and the mindset. Like, I admit, when I first found Bitcoin, I'm looking at it from the technology perspective, and I didn't understand all this stuff about like fiat and central banks and the structure and money printing and all of that. And I think that's the missing piece for most people. So they don't quite you have to really understand the problem Bitcoin solves before you can have the conviction for Bitcoin the way that we do. And so the mistake, is to try to diversify. And the only reason people do that is because they don't truly understand Bitcoin or fiat.
Absolutely, 100% agreed. Thank you so much, Michelle, for being on already a second time on my podcast. Was a real pleasure. Before I let you go, what is the best way to reach out to you, contact you, and read your stuff?
Sure. So I'm almost exclusively on X, and it's just my name, Michelle Weekley. My DMs are open. You can message me there. I am working towards migrating to Nostr. There's only so much time in the day, but I am there, and I presume I'll spend more time there in the future. But right now, I'm primarily on X because I'm trying to reach normies. And yeah, you can message me there if you're trying to contact me. but I will not message you. There's a lot of bots still.
The bot problem, I think it will not go away anytime soon. Still get like I think it seems like every second or third week someone comes to me and like, hey, I reported 3 scammers. And I'm like, okay.
Right.
It's so normal now that there are scammers and bots and impersonators out there. It's a bad thing, but it's unfortunately already very normal. But I think it's great that you also like. I see it as a bad thing if we completely switch away from Twitter to Nostra. I think we need those digital soldiers to be also on Twitter, on YouTube, on TikTok, on Instagram, on LinkedIn, to have the freedom mindset and the Bitcoin mindset and represent that thing also there. It's the same with fleeing the country.
Right.
If all Bitcoiners are going now to Nostra, Twitter is not going away. Twitter is way bigger than Bitcoin. It's just Bitcoin will no longer be represented on Twitter.
Yeah, and I really miss a lot of my friends, a lot of the people that I loved following and interacting are exclusively on Nostr now. And I get it, I understand it, but I miss a lot of them. And I do think it's a disservice for some of that content not to be available to a wider audience. So that's the only reason I haven't made the complete jump yet. I think over time there will be a migration, but I agree with you. It's very important to represent those conversations and narrative to the normies who are still on these other platforms.
And you can copy, it doesn't mean you have to do one post here. Like this podcast is on YouTube, Rumble, Spotify, Apple Podcast, Twitter, and like 5 other podcast platforms. Doesn't like you can have different platforms. Like I think also like for Twitter, for podcasts it's more normal, but also for posts, like why wouldn't you copy the Twitter posts to Nostra? That makes total sense.
Sure.
But just me nerding out about social media. Thank you so much, Michelle, for being on and taking the time. Also, thank you so much for everyone that is watching and listening, for joining us today. As always, I'll be back tomorrow with another episode. Bye-bye.